Hi folks, my name is Michael Oso and I'm with DiscountASP.net, and in this video we're going to be deploying a web application using Visual Studio 2010's Web Deploy feature. We're going to cover a few things in this video. One of them is going to be deploying the actual web application, but the other is going to be creating the database, establishing the schema, and populating the data. We're also going to briefly cover web.config transformations and why we think that they're so important. This is something that's new to Visual Studio 2010, but we're very happy to see it. For the sample application that we're going to be working with today, we've elected to use Scott Mitchell's book review website. This is a standard ASP.NET application that's got a SQL backend to it. So thanks for watching the video, and we hope you'll find it useful. So let's get started. The first place we want to look to is our web.config file. Now the reason for this is because we're interested in our connection string. Generally speaking, we tend to use a different database in development than we do in our production environment. And the way we've handled this previously was to have a particular connection string. In this scenario, you can see we're using a SQL Express database. And at deployment time, update the web.config file to reflect the new connection string we're going to be using in our production environment. Well, rather than doing that, we're going to use something called web.config transforms. And to do that, inside my Solution Explorer, I'm going to right-click on my web.config file, and I'm going to choose Add Config Transforms. You can immediately see two other configuration files have been created. One is web.debug.config, and the other one is web.release.config. It's pretty self-explanatory, but essentially these two files are what are going to transform my web.config file into either a debug configuration or a release configuration. So let's take a look at our web.release.config file. And immediately what you're going to notice here is there's a series of tags here that are defining what is to be changed inside of the web.config. In this particular scenario, we want to change our connection string. So I'm going to go inside of our web.config, and I'm going to grab the name of the connection string that we're using. It's currently reviews connection string. I'm going to take this and I'm going to paste it into here. And what we're doing is we're essentially saying anytime you see the name reviews connection string inside of the web.config file, replace whatever's in there with the following connection string. So if you bear with me for a moment, I'm just going to copy and paste the connection string I'm going to be using in my production environment. Enter my password for the whole world to see. And I'm going to uncomment this line out. Okay, now I've saved that file. Okay, great. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my solution configuration up above here from debug to release. Now we get to the nitty-gritty of it and we can actually go into and change our package publish settings. So I'm just going to bring this screen up, and if you notice here, the configuration that we're currently working on is release. That's why it's saying that it's active, because up here I've set it to release. If I change it to debug, then we're referring to our debug configuration. But obviously what we're concerned with is our release configuration, so I'm going to leave it there. What you're going to see here is it's asking you basically some simple questions. What files do you want to deploy? In my case, I'm going to do only the files that I need to run the application. I'm going to exclude the generated debug symbols because they're not going to do me any good, and I'm going to exclude the files from the app data folder. Now the next question is in regards to publishing of the SQL database, which if I go into this open settings, all we're going to do is get to this next tab. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Here this stuff is all in reference to where the package is going to be created, where it's going to be set up. These aren't really things that I need to worry about too much. Their default settings are fine. So we're just going to go ahead and click this link here, which will bring us to our package publish SQL settings. So just to go over it really briefly, again, what we're doing is this tool is going to be looking into our current SQL Express database, it's going to create a script that's going to establish a schema and import the data into our production database. Um, so the easiest way to do this is just to click import from web.config. It's just grabbing the configuration screen, grabbing the connection string from my current web.config, which you all remember is a SQL Express database. The uh, the next question is what is the connection string of the destination or my production database? So I'm just going to grab that, update the password, and in the next series, it's going to ask if we want to pull the data and schema from the existing database, which we already talked about. Yes. Now here we've got a an option for selecting the schema only, the schema and the data, or the data only. Um, in our case, what we want to do is we want to do the schema and the data. One thing to remember is that if you are working with a hosting provider that has a attach restore functionality for their databases, you might want to use that rather than this. This is more geared for small amounts of data, that kind of stuff. But that's just a little tidbit I thought I'd mention. So now that we've set up these settings, we can go ahead and close it. And the important thing to remember is that these settings are persistent. So once we configure this, it's always going to be there. We can always use it. So that's going to lead us to our final step. Finally publishing our web application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my project here. I'm going to left click on publish, and I'm going to set up a profile. And the purpose of these profiles is to differentiate between perhaps a staging server, maybe different hosting providers. So I'm just going to give this profile a name. And the publish method, we've got a few options here. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. FTP file system, front page extensions. We're going to choose web deploy. The rest of these settings you're going to need to get from your hosting provider, as they're obviously going to vary. I'm just going to go ahead and input mine in. And we've got a checkbox here that says mark as an IIS application. I don't need to. Mine has already been done that way. I'm just uploading to my root directory. If you were creating a new directory, uploading an application to a subdirectory somewhere that this had not been configured, you would want to check this box. The next box is pretty important, and it's basically do not delete everything else that's currently there. So that's something to keep in mind. And with that, I'm going to enter my credentials, and I'm going to click publish. So at this point, we're just looking at my output window. We can see what's happening in real time. And essentially, from this point forward, we can just sit back and wait for it to finish. It might take a couple minutes, um, and there we go. It's successful. So let's test it. There we go. Just make sure we're getting data from the database. Yeah, we sure are. Let's take a look at the database itself just to show you everything's there. And there it is. So thank you for watching the video. This has been deploying a web application using Visual Studio 2010's web deployment tool.